We're here to talk about a little accessory. It's just a tiny thing. It's aimed at your turntable. It sits in between your headshell and your cartridge, and it's just a little sliver of material. It's a sort of composite. It's called the Cartridge Enabler. It's all of £19. That's right, 19 pounds. So it's not a great deal of cash, but as you'll find out, the performance really does outweigh that initial financial outlay. So as I say, it's a little bendy piece of material. It's made out of this composite. Composite what, you ask? Well, Origin Live are not telling us. It's a secret. I can't blame them really, because once they tell you, everybody else will know, and then they'll copy it, and then, so mayhem. So it's a little composite thing. It's just a tiny piece, just fits underneath your head shell, fits over the top of your cartridge, and it sits like a sandwich. And then when you put your cartridge screws through the holes, there's a couple of washers. One's a sort of silicone washer, and the other one underneath that is another washer made out of the same composite material. So what you get basically is, if you look at it side on, you'll see the screw head, you'll see a silicone washer. Underneath that there'll be the composite washer, then the head shell, then the cartridge enabler, then your cartridge. So bum 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 all the way down. According to Origin Live, it decouples, it damps, and it also stops or minimizes reflected energy. Now some people might think that is all the same thing, but really it isn't. So let me go through each one. Let's start with decoupling. When a cartridge is doing its thing, it creates lots of micro vibrations, and all these micro vibrations basically travel outside the cartridge and up the arm, and that doesn't do much good for the sound quality. So what happens with that is that these micro vibrations will go up the arm, but some of them will come back down the arm and back into the cartridge again, and that causes issues in terms of sound quality. It makes things a bit fuzzy, and you lose focus and precision. So that's one of the jobs that the Cartridge Enabler does. It gets rid, or it minimizes to such a very low extent, that those little micro vibrations. Also reflected energy. When energy emerges from the cartridge, because as I say, it's creating an awful lot of micro vibrations here, reflected energy emerges as a wave, and it just travels up the arm. It can bounce back into the cartridge, it can go elsewhere on the turntable, and again it sort of dulls, it sort of muddies the sound. Decoupling is a third task which the Cartridge Enabler does, and that basically prevents energy elsewhere getting into the cartridge. So I'm talking about energy from the bearing, or energy from the motor, finding its way, and it will, to the cartridge. So the enabler stops that as well. Now there'll be some people out there, and they'll be saying to themselves, no, this is all wrong. This shouldn't work. It won't work. It's bound to sound terrible. And those people will talk about rigidity. They will say that if you put a cartridge enabler, this piece of flexible stuff, which is very much like the material that you would find on the Origin Live platter mat, incidentally. But once you've put this cartridge enabler in, so it's sandwiched between the head shell and the cartridge, some people won't like that. Some people will think it will reduce the rigidity of the entire ensemble, the cartridge and the Tonearm. And Origin Live know this, they understand this. Let's not forget, Origin Live makes some amazing turntables and some of the best Tonearms in the world. So they're familiar with the whole rigidity thing. And for those who think rigidity is all, well, it isn't. Not really. Rigidity is important, yes, but if you have a completely rigid arm and a completely rigid cartridge installed on that arm, it's still going to produce issues. It's still going to produce a vibration, because the cartridge is like a little generator. It's vibrating left, right and centre, and all those vibrations are going in the arm. So just having rigidity doesn't actually solve anything. It's one answer, but you need a whole host of answers if you want a great sounding arm, cartridge, turntable combo. The metaphor I'd like to use to explain that is, imagine a tank. I don't mean a water tank, but I mean a proper tank, a military tank, with a gun, that sort of tank. Caterpillar tracks, the whole thing. So imagine that. A successful tank is a rigid gun platform. It has to be stable. If you're going to get an accurate shot away from a tank and hit your target, the gun itself is going to have to be rigidly attached to the chassis, and it's going to have to be stable. That's the main thing. Now, if you make a tank and all you think about is rigidity and nothing else, then if you have a tank bouncing across the terrain, it's going to be all over the place. It's not going to be able to hit anything because it's not going to be able to target anything. So modern tanks are rigid, yes, but they also include complex suspension. And the suspension removes the complex vibrations that come from all over the place, from bouncing on the ground, the nature of the terrain itself, the vibration from the engine, the vibration from all the mechanics, the people inside it, everything else. There's a whole host of suspension applied technologies within a tank. And that's basically kind of what you're looking from a Tonearm. You don't just want rigidity. Rigidity is only part of the issue. And when you design a good quality, top quality Tonearm, you're looking for more than rigidity. You're looking for a basket of suspension effects. So when you add a cartridge enabler, you're literally just enhancing that suspension. So the cartridge enabler is a source of suspension that the cartridge rides upon. Fitting the actual enabler takes a little bit of patience, takes a little bit of care. Do it slowly, don't rush. So you've got lots of little bits here. But if you are methodical and, as I say, have a bit of patience with this, then it's fairly easy to install. The only thing I would ask you to do is do a dry run, because if you're adding an enabler which is millimeter thick, and then you're adding a couple of washers above the head shell, you may find that the screws are, in some cases, a bit small. So do a quick dry run. It might be that you may need to invest in a couple of longer screws. That's a possibility. That won't occur with all cases, which is why you need to do a dry run. So I'd recommend you do that first before you do a proper install. Also, when you've actually installed the thing, so you've got your head shell and your enabler and your cartridge, if you think about it, if you've got a millimeter of material there, your cartridge is now being pushed down. And if your cartridge is being pushed down, then your arm is no longer absolutely level. It's off by a millimeter. It's just been pushed upwards by a little bit. So on the other side, you may need to just level the arm up. Now, leveling the Tonearm is easier with some turntables than with others. So for example, there might be a built-in tool on the back of your arm to level up the arm, which is great. And as I say, it only needs raising by 1 millimeter. So it's a very slight thing. Other arms, you may need to take the actual arm off, insert a couple of 1 millimeter washers, and then put it back on again. So it'll just raise the arm just by a tiny amount. Sometimes you won't be able to do this at all. Some of the budget arms out there, they're basically fixed to the arm, and you're not going to get this thing off with a hammer and chisel. It won't move. So on cheaper turntables, if you can't raise the arm, is all lost? Well, no, not really. Because with the enabler in place, the enabler itself might solve more sonic issues than it causes. So yeah, you may have a Tonearm which is just slightly off, but the amount of benefit, the actual benefits that the cartridge enabler brings, might be greater than any issues you get with just having an arm which is just slightly off. It's worth trying. It's worth testing just to see. Let me get to the sound quality tests on this, and remember that point because I'm going to get back to it a bit later on. Okay? And if you do buy the enabler, I'd recommend buying it from Origin Live direct. Why? Well, if you install the enabler in your turntable, and as I say, it's only £19, it's not a massive investment. But if you do install the enabler and you love it, well, great, wonderful. If you install the enabler and you don't like the results and you think, sound quality is a bit messed up now, I'm not quite sure I like that, you can send it back to Origin Live and get your money back, and that's not a problem. I called Origin Live, I checked this with them, and they said, it's fine, you can do that. So it's worth a test, it's worth trying out. You're not going to lose anything. So to do my tests, to do my sound tests, I thought I would go to total extremes. I thought I would test the enabler on a very expensive turntable, and I also thought I would test the enabler on a very cheap turntable. The theory being, if it works well on both extremes, then anything in the middle it's going to be fine with. I grabbed one of my reference turntables, which is an Avid Acutus reference, and that has an SME4 arm built attached to it, and hanging off the end was a Vanden Hul Crimson Stradivarius. So the turntable was about, I don't know, 25,000 pounds. The arm is about 3.5, and the cartridge is around 4ish. So let's even that out. Let's say 30,000 pounds worth of turntable. Okay, I picked this for a reason, in a weird way. Yes, it's expensive, and it's my extreme. But the SME arm is the weak point. The SME arm in this turntable setup is the bottleneck. SME 4s and SME 5s are classic arms, and I think they're great. I wouldn't have it as my reference if I didn't like the arm. I do like the arm, but if you look at it cold-bloodedly, the SME 4 and 5 is off the pace by modern standards. It's not up to speed. The sort of the tapered arm tube is yesterday's technology. You can do a lot better. It's a bit overpriced as well. SME have hiked the price up to silly money, so it's too expensive for what it is. Nevertheless, it's still a classic arm. So that's attached to my Avid, and which is super expensive, and then you've got the super expensive cartridge hanging off it. I obviously played that as is. Then I attached the cartridge enabler and sat back and listened. So I played a little bit of Jethro Tull and Ella Fitzgerald as a contrast, and was amazed because you could hear the difference. Firstly, bass was more solid, more confident, but also nimble. It sort of moved around quicker. It wasn't as stodgy as it was before. It sort of dragged before. Now, with the enabler in place, it was very nimble, quite agile even. In terms of the upper mid-range and the treble, there was new clarity there, new transparency. There was a lower noise floor, so there was a lot more detail coming through. And there was a bit of a shock, because you've got almost, well, somewhere around £30,000 of turntable here. And this tiny, tiny £19 accessory improved the sound, which just goes to show how effective this little thing is. But don't forget, you're putting this right on the end, right on the tip of your hi-fi. This is at the very point of your hi-fi. This is where the cartridge is. And the cartridge is such a delicate, fragile, but also sensitive instrument. So it's not really a massive surprise. But even so, in monetary terms, it's a no-brainer. Now with the SME4, I could move the rear of the arm so I could compensate for the extra 1mm I lose at the other end where the enabler is installed. So that was fine, I could even that out. I couldn't do that with my second reference test. That was right the other end, right down to a Lenco L3808. £200 this thing cost me, £200. So we're almost on the verge of sub-budget here, just on the edge of budget. And we're looking at a very basic design. It's a direct drive. It's a great turntable for what it is. It's a great turntable for the price. But in ultimate terms, the arm is a bit shaky. The turntable's a bit plasticky. It's not amazing. Do you know what I'm saying? So there are issues all over this Lenco. Would the enabler actually help at all, or would it just amplify the mess? Would it actually expose more issues? I wasn't quite sure which way this would go. But this is a usual sort of Technics type arm where you have that SME type connector, so you can unscrew the actual head shell off, you know, that type, and you can take the head shell away. The cartridge itself is a basic Audio-Technica 3600 with a conical stylus. And so I installed that, and I put the enabler in between the cartridge and the head shell. Because of the nature, the shape of the actual cartridge, it has a funny little step at the front, which is slightly unusual. But because of that, the enabler sort of hung over the top bit and drooped. And you can see this in an image I'll show you now. If you find that you get this overhang, and not all cartridges are the same shape, not all cartridges are installed in the head shell in the same way, you may get a little bit of overhang in different places. You can easily trim off the excess with a knife. It's easily done, and it is recommended just to make it look nice. So if you see any overhang or bits drooping, as I say, just use a knife and just cut off the excess. It's not a problem in terms of sound or anything else. So you are allowed to do that. It's fine. Now there is an issue with the Lenco in that you're not going to move the rear of the arm. The rear of the arm is clamped. There's no way to raise the back of the arm to compensate for installing the enabler. The weird thing was, looking at the Lenco's arm as is, it looked as though the cartridge was riding a bit low anyway. So normally, ideally, you would have an arm which is dead level. But the arm on the Lenco looks as though the cartridge is dipping down a little bit anyway. So when I installed the cartridge enabler, that dip actually corrected the arm. So the enabler actually helped the Lenco in this particular case. It might not be the case for your turntable, but for this particular Lenco, it actually helped generally. So it was a good thing. So the arm actually leveled out, weirdly enough. In sound quality terms, well, I was impressed. To give you one example, the Ella Fitzgerald track, there was a track called Hernando's Hideaway, old classic track. And when Ella Fitzgerald starts to sing, there should be reverb, echo, old-fashioned echo. It was all done by echo chambers back then. So old-fashioned echo was in and around her voice. Without the enabler, the echo was there, kind of. It was sort of there. With the enabler in place, the noise floor lowered, the clarity increased, and the echo attached itself more naturally to the voice. It could be, before it could have a sort of stuck on with blue tack effect. But with the enabler in place, this echo was a little rather more natural, but also a bit more extended. There seemed to be more of it surrounding her. So more atmosphere during the actual vocal, more naturalistic feeling, more naturalistic sound from her presentation, her delivery. I also felt the brass section on her track, and also the guitars on the Jethro Tull were cleaner, more tonally accurate. Cymbal hits were more delicate, more fragile. So this is a £200 turntable. No question at all that the enabler improved the overall sound quality. I was very happy indeed. Now this is one of the cheapest turntable upgrades I've seen in quite a while, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, it really is. Give it a try, and that's another thing. You can give it a try. If you don't like it, you can send it back. So what have you got to lose? £19? It's not a great deal of cash, is it really? But you'll love it. I'm sure you will. It even comes in a little paper container to cut the costs down. So there's no fancy packaging. There's a little picture on the front which shows you the sort of installation picture. So the whole package presentation helps to keep that price down as well. My verdict, go get it. And that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye bye.